begin with dua recitation led by Mr. Fadil.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا حامدين حمدا صابرين حمدا شاكرين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده. يا ربنا لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك الكريم عظيم سلطانك. Ya Allah, we gather today to express gratitude upon your greatest gift toward us. In conjunction with this event, we ask for your help and guidance. Ya Allah, kindly give us strength and courage to face the struggle to find and gain knowledge. Kindly bestow blessing and physical and spiritual health, fitness of mind, peace of mind, strength of spirit. Ya Allah, give strength to our teachers, to our leaders to continue to serve for people's society, nation and religion. Ya Allah, make our country a country who got the blessing and favor, everlasting peace and prosperity of all time. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azabannar. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barik wa sallim. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Taqabbalallahu minkum wa minkum taqabbal ya karim.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's forum titled Tariff War, Malaysia in the Midst of Global Uncertainties, jointly organized by the Faculty of Business and Economics, Universiti Malaya, and the Institute of Advanced Studies, Universiti Malaya, in collaboration with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Malaysia. We are honored to have with us an eminent panel of speakers who will help us unpack Malaysia's position amid shifting global economic landscape. Allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists of this afternoon. Dr. Nung Sari Ahmad Radi, the Chairman of Khazanah Research Institute and also the Adjunct Professor at the Faculty of Business and Economics, Universiti Malaya. Professor Jomo Kwame Sundaram, Research Advisor at Khazanah Research Institute and also Emeritus Professor at the Faculty of Business and Economics, Universiti Malaya. Professor Dato' Wu Wing Tai, Visiting Professor at the Institute of Advanced Studies, Universiti Malaya, University Chair Professor at Liaoning University, and Distinguished Professor Emeritus at University of California, Davis. Professor Evelyn Devadesan, Professor at the Faculty of Business and Economics, Universiti Malaya, and the Vice President of the Malaysian Economic Association. And moderating today's forum is Professor Zaharum Naim, the Adjunct Professor and Director of Allianz Center for Governance at the Faculty of Business and Economics, Universiti Malaya. May I first invite our host representing the Faculty of Business and Economic Management to deliver the welcoming remarks. Datin Professor Dr. Izlin binti Ismail, the Deputy Dean for Research and also Professor at the Faculty of Business and Economics, Universiti Malaya. Please, Datin.
Thank you so much, Madam MC, Dr. Diana. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and very good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I'm going to repeat her salutations because I'm welcoming the guest today. On behalf of our Dean, Professor Yusniza Kamarul Zaman, I'd like to welcome, first of all, our guest, Yang Berbahagia, Professor Dr. Goh Boon Tong, Deputy Dean of Institute for Advanced Studies, who is the co-host for today. His Excellency, Mr. Karim Muhammad Al-Sadat Abdul Karim Abdul Khalik, Ambassador of the Arab Republic of Egypt to Malaysia, who is making his first visit here to Universiti Malaya. Welcome, sir. Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Muhammad Al-Amin Abdul Majid, our adjunct professor. Welcome, Tan Sri. Deputy Deans, colleagues and students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to Universiti Malaya and to the timely and insightful public forum entitled Tariff War, Malaysia in the Midst of Global Uncertainties. I would like to begin by first of all extending my sincere appreciation to the faculty members who tirelessly worked to get the event up and running today, as well as our co-host, the Institute for Advanced Studies, and another co-host affiliated with Datuk Prof. Wu, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Asia, for jointly organizing the forum. Your tireless effort in creating such platforms for intellectual exchange are commendable and truly vital for advancing discourse on pressing global and national issues. The subject of today's forum could not be more relevant. I mean, it's trending every day, you know. And as the world grapples with mounting geopolitical tensions, shifting trade policies, and post-pandemic economic realignments, nations such as us, open, trade-reliant, and globally connected, must navigate these challenges with foresight and resilience. As such, we are truly honored to host an exceptional panel of distinguished speakers who I'm happy to actually note are all affiliated with the faculty. Dr. Nung Sari, Adjunct Professor, Professor Jomo, Emeritus Professor, Professor Dr. Wu Wing Tai, Visiting Professor at Institute for Advanced Studies, and hopefully regular visitor to our faculty going forward too, and our very own Professor Evelyn, Professor at the Department of Economics. We are equally privileged to have Professor Zaharom, Adjunct Professor, as well as the Director of the Allianz Center for Governance as today's moderator, because we'd like to have his insight as well into governance and policy communication that would certainly enrich this session. This forum provides an excellent opportunity to explore how Malaysia can respond to the complexities of modern trade conflicts while remaining competitive and inclusive. I hope today's discussions will ignite fresh ideas and inspire our students, researchers and policymakers to think critically and act boldly. At Universiti Malaya, we pride ourselves on being not only a centre of academic excellence, but also a vital contributor to national and regional progress. Forums such as this are a testament to our unwavering commitment to public service, knowledge exchange, and policy engagement. And as such, I'd like to conclude. Thank you again to all our esteemed panelists and moderator and all the participants for making the time to be here with us today. May the discussions that follow be stimulating, solutions-driven, and impactful. Thank you and enjoy the session. Back to you, MC.
Thank you, Professor Islin, for the warm welcome speech. Ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, I now invite our moderator, Professor Zaharom Naim, to begin the sessions. And may I invite all the panelists to the stage. Thank you.
Sit down. I'm going to introduce you. Tak apa dulu. Good afternoon, honored guests and distinguished panelists. The topic we are looking at today is for many a crucial and worrying one. This tariff war, some say will reshape the world and structures that have underpinned it since at least the Second World War. Some even say we need to go back to the days of colony and imperial power to help us fathom these changes that virtually started on April the 2nd when Donald Trump declared, "My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day," and then rambled on about reclaiming US wealth and imposing tariffs on virtually the rest of the world. His speech and subsequent actions have been a reiteration of Trump's might is right worldview, as Professor Wu recently wrote. Whether the anticipated changes brought about by these tariffs will be permanent and of seismic proportions, or are just a brief flash in the pan episode internationally and for Malaysia, is what we are hoping to find out this afternoon. So without further ado, let us hear from this formidable panel of experts. Each speaker will present for about 15 minutes. Q&A will be left till the end of the session when all panelists have spoken. So I now call upon our first speaker, our first expert, economist and policy specialist, Dr. Nung Sari, to deliver his take on the tariff war in Malaysia. And as you can see, it's brief biodata. Dr. Nung Sari, it's not there. Dr. Nung Sari is, has a wide and long experience in corporate Malaysia and assessing the role of the state. Among his many current positions is that of chairman of Khazanah Research Institute. And I think you've already been told that he is adjunct professor at the Faculty of Business and Economics here and an advisor to the Allianz Center for Governance. Dr. Nung Sari, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for having me. Let me start by probably use my time to re-characterize the theme of the forum today. In my view, it is not a tariff war. It is actually much more than that. Although the Trump administration, through Revelation Day, characterized it as a tariff war. So to me, initially I had a difficulty in trying to see the coherence of what was being done. And then I finally concluded that actually there is no coherence to this whole thing, except for two objectives. One probably driven by the Secretary of Treasury on Besant's side, and the other one probably driven by Navarro on the trade side. Trump is perhaps more driven by the trade rhetorics rather than the Treasury rhetoric. But if there's a couple of things in the US, despite the fragmentation that you see in their politics that they both agree on, one is actually that Israel is the 51st state of US, and the other one is actually that China is the existential threat to the US. So I think the only common denominator that you can find in as far as this topic is concerned is that actually China is an existential threat to the US. And by positioning in that manner, he is able to then coalesce a larger political constituency around this thing, because Biden essentially continued what Trump one started against China. So there is this issue of trade and deficit vis-a-vis China on the trade side. But if you read the slightly more, I don't know how to characterize it, the more cerebral part of the Trump administration, the Council of Economic Advisors, for example, actually wrote something that is a lot more than what was advocated. So there is this trade and a trade imbalance issue vis-a-vis China and quite a number of other places. But there's also this bit on the position of the US dollar as the currency with the exorbitant privilege of endlessly borrowing without having to worry about how to pay. So now, I think Besson is more concerned about this bit, whereas Navarro and Trump is concerned on this side. What is different with this round with Trump is actually they have gone totally bonkers in the sense that they have totally ignored the conventions and the institutions, global institutions that were part of what the US built for the last, 70 years, 80 years. So basically, they adopted a unilateral approach, which is what the tariffs are. It's actually not even tariffs, right? It's not even countervailing duties. It's just something that Trump called tariffs. But one is actually is unilateral. Unilateral in the sense that it goes against everything, every convention, every global institution, WTO, UN, everything you name it. And then secondly, it adopted a somewhat bullish punya stance. Basically, it's a gangster thing. Call you up one by one and let's do a deal. And in an attempt for Trump to basically address, to me, if you put it from Trump's perspective, it is a legitimate concern of addressing US hegemony, economic as well as political hegemony in the world. So that is what they're doing. But it's a lot of things that are still uncertain in the short term. But what will happen eventually, in my view, and Malaysia kenalah whatever lah, pretend to go and do negotiate whatever we can negotiate on a bilateral basis. But these things, in the short term, probably that's what it needs to be done. But in the longer term, this is perhaps the beginning of a restructuring of the rules of the game in terms of how trade and globalization, in the sense of trade and movement of capital and goods and so on, will evolve towards in the next 10 to 15 years. Now, whether or not who become so-called victors or losers, winners and losers, until it's quite immaterial. But coming back, I will end with this. Actually, for Malaysia, the position for Malaysia is that we are too small to be of any significance on our own. But so the hedge against the emergence of these two blocks is actually, I think we should work together closer and more meaningfully in the neighborhood of ASEAN. So then, instead of a 35 million economy, which is only like 450 billion USD economy, then we are part of a 600 million economy with maybe the size of about, say, $3 to $4 trillion, which is actually bigger than India. So I think while we have to manage the uncertainty in the short term, and a lot of things are still uncertain, I think on the longer term, Malaysia should perhaps integrate itself, or rather ASEAN should play a much more significant role in providing the hedge of individual nation states within ASEAN against this what will be an ongoing geopolitical and economic war between the US and China. So I do not see the letting up of American politics giving in towards China's ascendancy, and then that is not a Trump thing, that is not a Republican thing. I think that's an American thing. I think the pivot to Asia that started by Obama and it continued on under Biden and even under Trump, will be a central theme in shaping geopolitics internationally and therefore global institutions. If you look at so-called global institutions, whether it is the World Bank, IMF, WTO, none of them has actually come out very strongly to say we need to preserve multilateral institutions, because all of them are funded by US. So I think that's a different scenario that we're looking at. It is much more than just a tariff war. It is an attempt by the US to extract stuff unilaterally, but also in the longer term to keep its the status of the USD as the hegemonic currency. So they want the cake and they want to eat it too, because so Trump will, I think the whole strategy, to put it in more concrete terms, is actually to devalue the dollar the way that the US did in 1985, probably vis-a-vis Japan, on the trade side, to devalue the dollar against the renminbi and most other major trading currencies. And then in his short term, he needs to find some money to pay for his tax breaks. But at the same time, the US would still want to be able to print money to finance its huge accumulated debts, which is what is now 120% of GDP. But the biggest problem that they're facing is actually who is going to buy those debts. The arrangement all this while is actually the surplus nations on the trade side would use that surplus to buy the debts. But now, if they're trying to reduce the surplus on trade, then the question is, how are you going to get the liquidity to finance the purchases of US Treasury bills and Treasury bonds? And I'll end by saying, you look at 10-year bonds, US bonds, it has edged up to going towards 5%, 4.6, 4.7, while the dollar itself is weakening. And US 30-year bond, longer-term bond, have also, the yields have also gone up. So basically, the real existential threat, in my view, is actually not so much the trade side, it's actually the position of the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world. And without that, I think US is a much weaker economy than what it is. You'll probably end up like Russia lah. The ruble is nothing, the economy is smaller than Korea, but they have lots of bombs and missiles and things that can kill people. So I'll stop with that first. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nunsari. Can you hear me? Thank you, Dr. Nunsari. Can you hear me now? Please. Sorry about that. Thank you, Dr. Nunsari, for what I feel has been a captivating sort of account of things. But which raises a lot of questions, I feel, which you can ask later. And as we digest all that, let me quickly introduce Professor K.S. Jomo, who really needs no introduction, especially if you were a Malaysian academic or in civil society in the 1980s and 1990s. For some, especially those in the corridors of power, Jomo was perhaps seen as, pardon my French, the enfant terrible of Mahathir's Malaysia. Currently, Professor Jomo is research advisor at Khazanah Research Institute. So we have the stage, Professor.
Thank you very much, Rom. thank you to the Faculty of Business and Economics. I think I got it right, where I used to work more than 2 decades ago. And thank you very much for this invitation. For all of you, Salam Alaikum. I think this greeting of peace is not to be taken for granted anymore, especially in the times in which we live. We are living in very, very dangerous and perilous times. And I think I cannot exaggerate the significance of how dangerous times are. It is not just for the people of Gaza. It is not just the situation in the eastern part of Ukraine. It is all over the world. We are living in very dangerous times. But that's a subject which is related to this. Because as Sun Tzu, as well as Baron Clausewitz, reminded us many centuries ago, war is an extension of politics. War is an extension of politics. And I would add, now, war is an extension of economics as well. And this, I think, is extremely important for us to understand if we are trying to make sense of the present times. Professor Wu, in his wisdom, chose to focus on the question of Trump's tariffs in designing this panel. But I think, as Dr. Nong has reminded us, this is about much more than tariffs. This is basically war by other means. It's very difficult to tell us what the first moment was. For some people, it was the arrest of the daughter of Huawei's founder in Canada about 8 years ago. For others, there are different starting points. Let us not forget, for example, that it was Barack Obama who began the so-called pivot to Asia, which was basically an attempt to counter China. It was Barack Obama as well who basically undermined the ability of the World Trade Organization to settle disputes by refusing to agree to the appointment of judges to the panel. So we are living in times which are, as our title today reminds us, these are very, very uncertain times. And so all this has to be seen, as we are often reminded by commentators, that when Mr. Trump does something, he's often doing it for effect, you know. And so, but it's very difficult to estimate, to guess what his real objective is. And this makes it very difficult, especially for small countries like ours, which do not have much of a bargaining position. Xi Jinping can say that yes or no, I'm not going to play by your game, go ahead and raise tariffs, and so on. But these are not options for smaller countries, for countries like Malaysia, for Laos, and so on and so forth. And this is part of the problem. And as we know, as President Trump has openly announced, he is not interested in so-called collective bargaining. He does not believe in collective bargaining. He believes in one-on-one relations. And obviously, for small countries, for weak countries, we are in a very, very weak position when it comes to bargaining. And this is why I think the former Singaporean Foreign Secretary misses the point when he criticizes PMX for trying to negotiate on behalf of ASEAN. It's not that ASEAN has very common interests as far as the tariffs are concerned. But the point is to have to establish a sense of solidarity in order to improve your bargaining position. And we are today at the cusp of an ASEAN summit. There will be a second one later this year. But I think it offers us an opportunity to reflect on two old ASEAN principles in response to the current predicament. Number one, I think it was 52 years ago that the leaders of this region agreed on something called ZOPFAN, establishing a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. You have to remember that when ASEAN was created, in 1967. When ASEAN was created, it was not created as an organization for all of ASEAN, all of Southeast Asia, sorry. It was 4 countries which had conflicts with one another who created ASEAN initially. Malaysia, of course, had conflicts with Indonesia as well as the Philippines over the question of the establishment of Malaysia. They had objected to it for various reasons. Singapore, of course, had seceded from Malaysia in 1965. And among these countries as well, there was not a singularity of hearts. So in a sense, ASEAN was created in similar situation that the European Union was created. The European Union was created to basically overcome the centuries-old conflicts between the Germans and the French. Okay? Alsace and Lorraine in eastern France today were, for a long time, part of Germany. That's why many colleagues from France have German-sounding names, precisely because they are from there. We refer to the Alsatian dogs, as German shepherds. They are no longer German shepherds, technically speaking, because of this kind. So the point I'm trying to make is that ASEAN was created in particular conditions, but it didn't take us very long. Even before the end of the Vietnam War and the Cambodian War and the Laotian War, it didn't take us very long to get our act together and be more forward-looking, to create a commitment to a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. Have we made progress so far? To some extent, we did. The Philippines got rid of all its military bases in the 1990s. But where today? The Philippines now have 11 military bases, 4 of which are in the northern part, directly facing Japan. Okay? We all know why those military bases are there. And we have the additional problem of a number of leaders in the world, especially Asian leaders, who have problems with the United States. So to overcome their problems and to enable them to access the United States, they have to go to deal with the United States on terms which are favorable to the United States. Okay, I need not go into such detail because this is a diplomatically sensitive issue, but you can guess at what I'm pointing. So we have this situation now where the zone of establishing a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality is especially important. And this year is also the 70th anniversary of Bandung, the Conference of Asian and African Leaders, which was very, very important and basically triggered off the non-aligned movement. The other point, of course, to remember, of course, it was also the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Okay, in August, as far as our region is concerned, but in Europe they celebrated it earlier this month. But it's also important to remember there's something else, not specifically about ASEAN, but a progression from ASEAN itself, which is very relevant today. And here I'm referring to something which we often popularly refer to as ASEAN +3, which has a concrete embodiment in the form of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. Okay? Have you ever heard about any meetings about the RCEP? No, because the RCEP has made a lot of commitments, but in very general terms. There is very little momentum, and the main reason why there's been little momentum is because until fairly, the Northeast Asians couldn't get their act together. Depending on who was president of Korea, the Koreans either resented China or resented Japan. And in Japan, of course, people like the late Prime Minister Abe Shinzo was very committed to create his so-called Indo-Pacific Partnership, very pro-US and anti-China. Okay? Abe, of course, is now history, and that sentiment still exists. It's very strong in Japan, but there's also a counter to that. The beginning of April this year, we know that there was the declaration of Liberation Day on the 2nd of April, Some of us initially thought it was a delayed April Fool's joke, but it's not a joke. It's something to be taken very seriously, and we would be making huge mistakes by dismissing it as the acts of a crazy man. Because I can assure you this is not the acts of crazy man. It's a man who thinks about things in particular ways. He's often referred to as being transactional. Some of us who study these kinds of things might refer to him as having a zero-sum game approach towards things. There is no possibility of a cooperative win-win outcome as far as Trump is concerned, because that's not the way he thinks. I'm not even sure he thinks very much in the long and medium term, although he makes a lot of claims about that. But what the point I'm trying to make is that we have something else called RCEP, which we haven't activated. RCEP offers far, far more than ASEAN can ever offer. Let's face it, we have two things going for, as far as ASEAN is concerned, on the economic side. One is the ASEAN Free Trade Area, and basically nothing much has happened for more than 3 decades as far as the AFTA is concerned. The second thing, of course, is something which came out, which was called Chiang Mai, the Chiang Mai Agreement, which was very important and which was built. But what have we seen? A reluctance on the part of Southeast Asian countries to do far more than move from bilateral swap arrangements to multilateral swap arrangements. That's all we have done. We haven't gone further than that. We have a huge opportunity. Yi Chang-yong, the governor of the Bank of Korea, has been advocated for years for a much more proactive policy. I don't know whether Professor Wu was a contemporary of his at Harvard, but Chang-yong has been, since he became governor of the Bank of Korea, he has been very strident about this. 2 years ago, PMX was in Tsinghua University after the Boao Forum in Hainan. And he went to Tsinghua. Because he was not expecting to speak, somebody hadn't prepared a speech for him. He spoke off the cuff. And he was very well received. And the reason he was very well received was because he was thinking on his feet and moving forward and making some very concrete and important proposals. And most importantly, he talked about the possibility of an Asian monetary fund. In other words, thinking beyond the present situation. All I'm trying to say is that we have a possibility with the ASEAN chairmanship of setting an agenda for the future, both politically as well as economically. An agenda which will strengthen the region. Because I'm not a fortune teller. I cannot anticipate what Mr. Trump will come up with next. And let's face it, we don't even know what he wants because he is doing things for effect. He has bargaining chips. Shock and awe, as George Bush put it. The last point I would like to make is that it's a fundamental problem with the economic system, international economic system. And that system was pointed to by Keynes recognized this. Schumacher, who was a collaborator with Keynes, also recognized this, and so did Mikhail Kaletsky. And that is that there is no payment settlement system which deters countries having trade surpluses. So there is an incentive for countries to have trade surpluses. So when China and Japan succeeded, when Japan and Germany succeeded in rebuilding their economies after World War II, they were trying to run trade surpluses. You need, and we know that from a trade surplus situation for the first decade and a half or so after World War II, the U.S. has been in deficit since the 60s. So we have a situation where the U.S., where Henry Morgenthau, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, and Harry Dexter White opposed the idea of a settlements arrangements, which would have a disincentive for running trade surpluses, which is the root of the problem right now. So unless you resolve that problem, I'm afraid that this problem is going to be endemic to the international monetary system, which introduces very many perverse incentives. But I think what we should do, especially in this region, is go beyond thinking that whatever the problem is, free trade is the solution. We have to grow up and get out of that. Thank you.
Okay, quite a bleak but also hopeful picture of that Prof. Jomo paints for us all about the realities facing us in short term and also the long term. More for you to digest, more for all of us to digest in terms of looking at ways out of this situation. Thank you, Professor Jomo. Now, let me call forward Professor Wu Weng Tai, another heavyweight, who, as you can see, is a distinguished professor at the University of California, Davis, and is the University Chair Professor at the Liaoning University in China, and also a visiting professor here at the Institute of Advanced Studies. Professor Wu?
Good afternoon to my lucky fellow residents in Malaysia. I am, of course, suffering from performance anxiety, sitting here in the reflected glory of my colleagues. And I must thank Professor Islin for giving me this opportunity to get guidance on the work I've been working on. Both Jomo and Nungsari started by saying this is more than a trade war. This is obvious from the fact that the reason that Donald Trump gave for starting the trade war are just at odds with common practice, common decency, and intellectual coherence. For example, he looks at all the major countries that have run surpluses against the US, and he called that as the result of unfair trading practices. But you know the US runs surpluses against quite a number of other countries too. Should the US therefore face tariffs from these other countries in order to bring it to zero? That is clearly nonsensical reason. But the important thing is, it is nonsensical largely because there were certain things he wanted to do, and he just wanted to have the facade of justification for it. What are the objectives? There are at least two that have been emphasized, and I'd like to expand on them. The first thing that he wants to do is, well, the most important thing, the overarching force, is that he wants to be a historical figure. He wants to be carved on Mount Rushmore as the new stone head. And he would not mind to become a president again after 4 years by non-constitutional means. But you got to get popularity before you can attempt to achieve that goal. But the important thing is, he likes the drama, but all that drama is designed to bring him to be the figure on the statue of the man on the horse standing in the middle of Washington, D.C. So one of the first things is clearly to address the reason for great unhappiness in America, which is that the income of the working class has been increasing very slow despite satisfactory growth rates all around, largely because the high growth rates were generated income that were disproportionately going to the top 2-3% of the population. The working class sees an alliance of global capitalist interests under free trade, whereby wages are kept down. So Donald Trump wants to raise wages in China, and the way he sees it, given his zero-sum mentality, is to bring back manufacturing jobs to the US, and hence the tariffs that we see. The second objective, in order to make sure that he is remembered as a great figure, is to make everybody feel US is number one in the world. And one way of showing it is a show of force to the rest of the world on April 2nd by attacking all the trade partners. And at the same time, to show that you folks cannot make progress without my participation, he withdrew the United States from the World Health Organization right after COVID, when we know that how important it is to have a better WHO, and he pulled out of the Paris Climate Treaty, calling climate change a religion. So the show of, has he succeeded? Is he going to be able to bring back high-paying jobs to the US? What a tariff does is that it artificially raises the price of a product received by the domestic manufacturer. And since the price is higher, the domestic manufacturer would certainly pay a higher wage to the workers. But the question is, would the wage increase in the future be going up? The answer is the kind of manufacturing jobs that come, the reason why those jobs left in the first place is that these were matured industries where future productivity growth is low. And so what that means is, given that future productivity growth is going to be low, wages cannot grow quickly. Basically, the children of the workers will inherit jobs that have no high growth potential in the future. What he is doing is he's able to raise the wages immediately for the present group, but their children will be stuck in dead-end jobs. The real solution comes from not only the government providing an enabling environment for business, but to actually create high-paying jobs by greatly increasing the productive capacity of the population in technological innovation in order to learn, to have good enough knowledge of science and math to be able to learn new technical skills so that you can climb up the value-added ladder as technological changes occur. But what do we see in the US? Funding for universities are cut. Funding for education lower than university has also been cut. The fact that the Department of Education is to be closed tells you that he's not doing the right thing, which is directly opposite to what China is doing. China is expanding its universities, in fact, going as far as Zhu Rongji expressing the desire that Beijing University and Tsinghua University will teach only in English so that they become global universities. And they are greatly encouraging the flow of foreign high-achieving foreign students into the countries, whereas the US is cutting visas all around for foreign students. So he's not going to succeed in creating jobs that will have high growth wage trajectory. Now, is that show of force working, showing the world that you cannot do without us. By taking on all the trading partners, he basically erected a great wall of tariffs surrounding the United States. Everyone else is trading freely with each other except with the United States. And if you were an economist, you would straightly know that if you marginalize yourself, isolate yourself, you will surely do very badly. And this is why the stock markets tank. And people started running away from the dollar, and the dollar slided. So that show of force meant that the rest of the world was too big to bully. And so that's why he announced a 90-day pause on that. But a 90-day pause that was announced on April 9th applied to everybody except China. Here it tells you the real target of all of this show of force is China. So the world is too big to bully. How about China? Well, Trump raised tariff rate to 145. The Chinese raised it to 125. Basically, trade will get to zero in this case. But given how closely intermeshed the two economies are, this sudden rupture in trading relations causes great pain to both sides. For example, 90% of toys in America and over 80% of home decoration, especially Christmas decoration, are from China. So toy shops are closing. And everyone who has a kid knows that things are not well. Basically, it got very painful in the United States. And China, too, was suffering pain from the closure of factories. Now, what did the meeting in Geneva produce? The meeting in Geneva was they would lower their tariffs, 35 for the US, down to 35 for US against China, and China 10 against the US. Basically, the lowering of tariffs occurred without any concession by China. So China was too big to bully too. That's what is understood. So why is Donald Trump doing this that is so painful? Clearly his goals are clear, which is to bring back economic prosperity, and the other one, to be able to hold down China. But this is unlikely to happen. You can see that when the more advanced chips were denied to China, Huawei produced a phone with the older chips but better programming such that it matched the latest iPhone in performance. And after ChatGPT came out, DeepSeek came out, using less high-performance chips but better programming allowed it to be on the same level as ChatGPT. So it's going to be very hard in holding back China, especially if the flow of talents from the rest of the world stop going to the US. So why are they doing this? They are doing this largely because despite the rhetoric of America being number one, Donald Trump realizes that makes no sense in this nuclear age, because there'll be no number one, there will be cockroaches left after a nuclear war. So the most important thing is we mustn't fight a war. And what is the best way not to fight a war? At some point, we have to agree what is my part of the world and what is your part of the world. We have spheres of influence. Just like after World War II, the division most clearly seen in Europe, in Korea, and in Vietnam. So both countries are engaging in defensive expansion of their spheres of influence before they get down to draw the line. This is why China has the 9-dash line that brings its maritime border right up to the doorstep of the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. And the United States talks about taking over Canada, Greenland, Gaza, and Panama. All of this is in line of you want to maximize your sphere of influence before we sit down to formalize the lines. So what should a small country like Malaysia do? I presume we can at least get to choose which sphere of influence we wish to be in. And to be grateful to be allowed to be a membership in them. I think the suggestions by both Nangsari and Jomo about the importance of ASEAN, I think I certainly agree with that, but I would go beyond that. Because to be a member of a sphere of influence means that you trade freely with the other members in your sphere, but you will not be able to have the same market access to the members in other spheres. So that means your market access is reduced. That means you are not at your highest level of potential. And the second thing is your sovereignty is definitely compromised, even though you might be led to greatness by Big Brother of your sphere. So what we need is to have the imagination and to have the creativity in mobilization to think about why can't we not be the buffer states between whatever spheres of influence that exist. To exist as a buffer, so you need to have a club of states that wish to be neutral, to be friend to all. But you cannot be a friend to all unless they accept the concept of neutrality. So in order for them to accept the concept of neutrality, you have to become big enough such that they have to pay you respect, such that China would feel that it is unable to push you. And the United States is unable to make the condition that I would only engage in bilateral negotiations rather than with a group. ASEAN is not big enough. And the instinctive resting idea is a new bundle. For example, at least 4 ASEAN members are involved in activities of BRICS. Indonesia is a member, Vietnam is a member, Malaysia has observer status, I think Thailand also has observer status. I think that this is not the best club for us to join. Something that more resembles the United Nations. Instead of bringing class warfare to the international level, why can't we have a club that is a North-South coalition? ASEAN, Japan, and Korea, that is a North-South coalition. But even that is, in order to get respect from China and the United States, we have to achieve critical mass quickly. If we don't achieve critical mass in economic weight, we will just remain a critical mass. So the answer to achieving critical mass is that we should get the middle powers of the world to join. And that would be the Europeans and some of the key GCC countries. But any club, in order to work effectively at the beginning, you cannot have the membership too big. So that's why you need to have a lot of high-income countries and not just low-income countries. The goal is not class warfare at the international level. The goal is common prosperity and international peace and the solution of global problems like climate change and biodiversity protection. So a club of ASEAN with Korea and Japan and with the EU and the UK would have a large enough critical mass that it will get respect from the big powers. And within this club, there are three functions that are very important. The first is that we maintain free trade among ourselves. We upkeep the WTO system. And of course, there are improvements one could make to the trade system, but basically it's multilateral free trade among the members of this middle power club. The second is to keep peace, to keep peacekeeping mission. We have to come up with ideas to both the Chinese and the Americans now, and to India later, on how to build trust among themselves and how to reduce the competition among them. And we will have not only have a peacekeeping mission, but to keep the efforts of protecting the global environment alive. The third component of this club of middle powers is the simple reason that the simple moral imperative that the rich should help the poor. Basically, the rich members should help the poor countries to accelerate their growth, like help countries of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, when they can be helped. But the reason is very important because how do you think membership of the spheres of influence is built? It is that Big Brother buys membership by dispensing patronage to poor countries. So they are vulnerable to joining spheres of influence because they cannot afford not to. That is why this club must have a development assistance component to it. And if you look at the growth potential of ASEAN and that of Europe, with the accelerated growth of ASEAN, by 2045, this club will be twice the size of the United States and twice the size of China. In such a situation, both of them will have to look to this club for alliance in order to win the competition between each other. And basically, we have become too big we have become so big that we are basically the kingmaker. And if any one of them joins this club, the other one will quickly join. Because if you don't, then you have just been defeated by self-marginalization. And this club, therefore, has the potential of crowding out this competition that we now see between China and the United States. So Malaysia being the head of ASEAN this year, she's not only mobilizing ASEAN, the fact that we are meeting the GCC countries the next Monday, that is the beginning. And the next part is to activate the ASEAN +3. In this case, we activate ASEAN +2, which is Korea and Japan. And we reach out to the Europeans. Because the Europeans have now known that after having seen how Zelensky was insulted in Trump's interaction with him, they realized the Americans are taking them for granted. Why are they taking them for granted? Because all of them suffer from Russia-phobia. And since they suffer from Russia-phobia, any movement by Russia would require the United States to come to their aid. So the US is very confident that they will have the Europeans in their sphere of influence. But that assumption, I think, can be challenged. And unlikely to be true given what Trump is doing to the global trade system and as well as his total disrespect for his traditional allies. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wu. Another cautionary sort of presentation for the region and for Malaysia, but we're quite hopeful as far as we form clubs, I guess, among our countries, with joining up with the wider Asia, I guess, some more things to think about and discuss after this, I guess. So, our final speaker, I better introduce our final speaker, not speak on too long. UM's own Professor Evelyn Debedeson is another formidable Malaysian economist. As you can see, she is not only a professor, but a vice president of Malaysian Economic Association. And her collaborations with regional and international agencies like the World Bank and Asian Development Bank will enable, I think, will enable her, I think, to provide us with more expert insights into this war and its implications. Professor Evelyn?
Thank you. Can I have the slides on? I just have 3 slides. Firstly, good afternoon, and just like to thank the faculty management for giving me the opportunity to share this platform with these 3 other speakers. Now, I'll start with, can you move on? Yeah. I will start with the potential, I will start with 3 key questions. I'll focus my comments on these 3 questions. What are the potential risks of reciprocal tariffs on Malaysia's trade and economic outlook? How best can Malaysia respond to reciprocal tariffs? Especially, how can we reset our trade with the United States? And what strategies would be most effective for Malaysia going forward? Now, next slide, please. In terms of, next slide, please. I will skip this. Next slide. Okay. In terms of the risk, now I'd like to start off, Malaysia is engaged deeply in supply chains, especially in electronics. So when one thinks of what are the likely impacts, one needs to look at trade exposure, the extent to which we are engaged in supply chains, and looking at the current situation, the regulatory ambiguity, because we have reactive policy making from Trump. Now, if I may quote recent data, exposure in terms of trade and GDP, which has just been released, shows that Malaysia is exposed to the tune of 2.6% of GDP. And what's very interesting is it's not just a direct impact from the tariff restrictions, but also indirect impact that comes through the region through supply chain shocks. Very often we see people talking about the plus point of trade being diverted from neighboring countries that have higher reciprocal tariffs, but people forget about this indirect transmission of supply shocks which could be much larger. If you look at shocks coming from the US and China, we have done studies to show that Malaysia is more affected by shocks coming through China, and number 2, Malaysia is more affected by shocks coming indirect through other countries in the region, because we are all linked through China. Our supply chains are all China-centric, but we are all linked to China through the region. So that's one interesting thing. But of course, you may say that at the moment, semiconductors have been exempted from tariffs. Now, the US makes up about 20% of our E&E exports globally. And out of that, 38% are tariff exempted. So for now, it's not much of an issue, but we are not certain how long there will be this relief for semiconductors. So that is in terms of the trade exposure and supply chain linkage. But what's more interesting is if you look at the recent WTO report, for the first time, WTO does a forecast on the impact on trade by looking at the effects on trade per se and trade policy uncertainties. And what the message is very clear here is that trade policy uncertainties can be much more damaging than trade per se. So this window period a lot of people refer this to a fragile pause. Fragile meaning because there are still the 10% baseline tariffs. And it's fragile because we do not know whether this pause will be extended. Recent discussions seem to indicate that Trump is thinking, because he's got about 150 countries to conclude deals with. Now, that's a tall order within a short period. Who goes first? So he's thinking now of actually going ahead with unilateral tariffs with certain countries. Now, if this happens, we can clearly see the deal is not the end game. So here the uncertainties are not just in terms of how long this pause or will it stay with the 90 days. The other uncertainty is, which he's already mentioned, the possibility of this retaliation extending to services and digital trade. That could be quite important for us because we are moving towards digital trade. In fact, within ASEAN, more than 50% of services are digitally delivered services. So digital trade is quite important for us. And the war on data is already quite real. If you look at another set of statistics that has been published recently in terms of who holds the power in data, in terms of sending and receiving data, within a period of 2001 to 2019, China was at 6th position, and today China takes top position, even displacing the United States in terms of data power and control. So, and the final, of course, uncertainty is whether semiconductors will continue to be excluded. In terms of the baseline tariffs that hold 10%, we already see the furniture industry complaining they are having problems. SMEs are badly affected because their profit margins are already very narrow. And the final change that we see is Trump's rollback on the AI diffusion rule. While some applaud this move, thinking that the AI diffusion rule, which places countries into 3 tiers and their curbs in terms of access to chips. While some applaud Trump rolling back, I think the underlying thing that people do not see is that this gives the United States greater leverage in the bilateral negotiations that are coming to negotiate access to chips by removing the AI diffusion rule. Now, all the discussions so far focus very much at the macro level, but less discussion has been centered on how firms are actually adjusting to these changes. Now, the semiconductor industry has just released some data saying that 32% of the semiconductors in Malaysia are exposed to the US and 18% to China. Now, these semiconductor industries now, they have to grapple with this issue where supplier chain resilience is no longer about active hedging. Everyone talks about hedging and balancing or diversifying your supply chains. But there's another added dimension to this supply chain resilience, and that is called traceability. Traceability is quite a critical dimension at the moment because as a firm, it's not about just diversifying your suppliers, it's getting into the right partnership and getting trusted suppliers on board. This involves cost. If you ask businesses, it takes about 2.5 years or 3 years to significantly shift their supply chains. It's not easy to find new suppliers, and to make sure that the suppliers also comply to certain rules and regulations, especially with the EU's CBAM coming on board. You have to make sure that the suppliers also, your suppliers take into account their carbon footprint. So traceability is about understanding who your suppliers are, ensuring that they are trusted, they meet some of these sustainability requirements, and more importantly, recently, Malaysia has also been flagged as a place of origin washing. Only yesterday I read MITI is addressing this issue because we do not have an FTA with the US. So what happens is we have non-preferential certificates of origin. So previously we had the chambers issuing
these COO, Certificate of Origin, and now MITI has taken the sole task of issuing the Certificate of Origin if the products are destined to the US to curb this kind of place of origin of washing. So I think traceability is something that is going to be very critical for firms. The second thing that firms would have to actually look into is, if you look at the recent truce between US and China, now China decided, after this truce, China decided to put on hold some of its export restrictions on certain companies, pause on NTMs. But what it's telling is China did not remove the export controls on 7 critical minerals. So I think this US-China tariff war is going to take longer. This kind of strategic competition is going to take longer than what we expect. Now, if this happens, firms will not only be challenged by diversifying their supply chains, finding the right supplier, finding a trusted supplier, they will eventually have to face segmented supply chains. They may have to choose between a US and Chinese tech ecosystem and navigate between different blocks or chip blocks. Now, given this scenario, how then should Malaysia reset its trade with the US? Now, I think I would like to start off by saying I don't think reciprocal tariffs were actually designed with the think is that the basis of the deal is so unclear. In the case of Malaysia, we are told to reduce our trade surpluses with the US. So are we going to commit to buy more US products? When you look at the amount of imports or the goods that are imported from the US, it involves integrated circuits, computers, planes, helicopters, spacecraft, base metal, construction materials, food, cereals, flour, starch, milk, toys, apparels, wood. How much more can we import? We have already, our imports are so diversified. So how is Malaysia going to commit to buy more products? Second is, are we going to reform, which is what US has flagged. Things like halal requirements are very stringent. Bumiputra policy, auto imports, rice subsidies. What Malaysia could do is to address the trade costs. Now, NTMs cannot be removed. Halal requirement is an NTM. It falls under technical barrier to trade. Why is it stringent? Because any kind of TBT, technical barrier to trade, comes or it gets packaged with conformity assessment procedures. Conformity assessment procedures include certification, testing, sampling, inspection, registration. So countries manipulate CAPs. You can make life difficult for businesses just to get a simple registration, for example. Make them go to 5 different ministries, huge documentation. So it goes back to the design and implementation of those NTMs. And Asia Pacific has been flagged for having high trade costs. So what we could do is to actually reduce that trade cost. That requires political will and commitment to actually streamline some of the measures, but we cannot remove them. Of course, NTBs such as the Bumiputra policy, that will be left to the country per se. Second, Trump has requested that we invest strategically in the United States. But I think what can be negotiated is to balance investments, to get the United States to invest in Malaysia. And I think one good place is to get the United States engaged in forward participation in supply chains, especially in critical minerals. Here, the United States can offer other business services, or which we call like consulting and management services, services in the form of mineral extraction, processing solutions, engineering services. So to balance, because China has already sort of tightened its grips in Southeast Asia in terms of critical minerals. So we need to balance that with the United States getting involved. So there could be a buy-in to draw in United States in the engagement by getting them interested in investing in Malaysia and not only requesting Malaysia to strategically invest. And at the same time, Malaysia needs to balance Chinese investments by making sure there's a local content, incentivize some kind of tech transfer, and so on. And the final thing that I think is very important, which is missed out so much in the dialogue, we are stuck talking about trade in merchandise goods. Today, trade is not about merchandise goods. It's about services and data flows that are packed to services. And there is no discussion. Of course, you may think, why didn't Trump bring up services? United States has a huge surplus with many countries in services. Now, you may think that, okay, because the political support in the US comes from the steel industry and so on, and therefore people have been quiet about services. But you tend to think of services differently if you look at physical goods. Now, all physical goods embed a certain amount of services, which we call other business services. Other business services in the context of Malaysia, more than 50%, we look to Singapore. But we also look to the United States because our electronic sector, they are mostly contract manufacturers. So a lot of the other business services like IT, consulting, comes from outside. So I think it is time now that Malaysia engage with the United States by opening up this dialogue on services that is intermediate services, services embedded in the value of goods, and this is less visible. Now, if you include this, then you have a better buy-in, because if the United States goes ahead and imposes tariffs on goods, what will happen is indirectly it will also decline. There will be ripple effects in terms of intermediate services that are packaged with the goods. So indirectly we'll be actually getting less demand of those services. So I think it's time that Malaysia, being the chair of ASEAN, sort of bring up this issue of intermediate services. And I think it is time that ASEAN, including Malaysia, track the value of services embedded in their goods. At the moment, companies have to track how much of Chinese value added goes into certain supply chains that are destined to the US, just to avoid geopolitical scrutiny from those that are free of Chinese value added. But I think it's time that firms also track the value of services embedded in goods. We can't be stuck discussing about trade in goods. And I think one other thing that we can think about is, I'm fascinated with medical devices, the health sector. Less is spoken about, the slide before, sorry. I think less is spoken about medical devices when we talk about data flows, such as data governance, yeah. There's so much we can engage with the United States, just like now we are engaging with India. A lot of our medical devices are imported, 15% from the US. Medical devices contain personal information of patients. Now, Malaysia doesn't have the capacity to govern data flows, and these are private information, yeah? So this is where AI and collaboration in healthcare is so important, and latest discussions with India, they're already looking into this, because India is at the forefront of other business services, and they have the AI capabilities to do so. So I think US should be brought into this equation. I'd like to end quickly with strategies going forward. A lot of relief is given to SMEs. At the start, I said SMEs normally will bear the brunt anyway of any tariffs, given compliance costs and so on. So I think beyond just giving them money, if you ask a lot of SMEs, a lot of carrot has been given to them. They're all underutilized. And the reason being is because SMEs don't have the capacity. So I think one needs to help them get involved in cross-border e-commerce trade. It's not just about putting up a web design in Facebook or Instagram and trying, it's more than that. Yeah? And then moving forward, we talked a lot about ASEAN, RCEP. A lot of these agreements sometimes, in reality, they don't really move as fast as expected because of the diverse membership. Members don't want to give in. Even ASEAN, I mean, we talked about harmonizing or streamlining, let's say, food standards. It has hardly moved over 2 decades. Only 22 food standards have been harmonized. It's not an easy feat. So I think we need to find maybe informal interactions or even formal ones, look at smaller circles of cooperation. The second is engaging in strategic and bilateral partnerships. Although this may not be in the spirit of multilateralism, we know minilateralism and bilateralism trumps regionalization and any form of multilateralism because it's the fastest way to move and it's the most practical. But one should be very careful not to do it mindlessly, just to rush and secure new agreements. Because recently, SCAP pointed out, we have so many agreements that are underutilized. ITIGA is one of it, ASEAN-India Trade in Goods Agreement. And why is it underutilized? Commitments are very low, scope of provisions are not relevant, we are stuck in physical goods when today, trade is embedded with services and data. There's no way you can distinguish the three. And then we need to move into new provisions, digital economy, of course, sustainability is one of it, and so on, which I think it's being discussed in the ASEAN Summit and in the recent upgrade, which is taking place, which is the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement. It's even in the upgrade of the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area 3.0 and so on. And finally, when we talk about regional cooperation, a lot of us talk about regional cooperation, but it hasn't moved beyond 30%. It's about in its mid-20s. Even Malaysia's export share, based on the recent data, Malaysia exports to the region only 29% of its total trade. Now, what does that tell you? It's not easy to create new supply chains. What's happening? You need to create new supply chains to see trade creation. What's happening now is firms are just extending their supply chains. When you extend your supply chain, it's just finding a new supplier along the nodes. It does not translate into a massive trade creation. So that kind of extension is actually a cost to firms. So one needs to think about the capacity of increasing intra-regional trade. Much can be done, and I think top on the list should be addressing trade costs. Trade costs are immense, and here I really talk about trade costs coming from conformity assessment procedures. Many mutual recognition agreements that really don't work. So ASEAN, I would think, would Malaysia and ASEAN, when I talk about regional cooperation, Malaysia and ASEAN, they should set the frameworks. One of it is the Digital Economy Framework Agreement. No doubt that comes with a lot of challenges. We have data localization in Indonesia and so on. So I think finding a baseline is important, but it stops there. I don't think ASEAN can force countries to have free flow of data. Nobody would want to bow down to that. And I think the key here is to review existing agreements. Agreements need to be reviewed in the sense that they provide deeper commitments. Some form of reciprocity must be there. In the case of ASEAN and India, they are bargaining with India, which has huge tariffs on agriculture, to remove those tariffs in a phased manner, and at the same time Malaysia to give some giveaways. So there must be some form of reciprocity. So I think the time is right, and it is happening that Malaysia, together with ASEAN, review some of these existing agreements instead of rushing and finding new agreements. You don't need new FTAs to come aboard. In fact, trade precedes any FTA flows. We saw that in AFTA and many other agreements. So with that, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Evelyn. We don't have much time, so I'll move this to a Q&A session. We've got the 4, right? That's it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, thanks. Let us move to the Q&A session. But before then, to quickly summarize what I think about the 3 points I feel that are there. One is that there's definitely a threat to Malaysia and the region as well. there are ways out of this in a sense, but ways which are complicated and require, I think, what you call it, cooperation within the country and also between countries, yeah, and between ASEAN and perhaps, as Professor was saying, to work out something, a membership with Japan and possibly India, I guess, coming into the picture. Third, all of this requires political will, I feel, political will at the national level and also political will at the regional level. Yeah. Anyway, that's my take on it. So it's not been it's been quite a gloomy picture being painted, but with some hope, I guess, a cautious picture, but with some hope, and that Trump is not really a madman, but he's actually strategizing in some ways. That's one of the things. So, we don't have much time, like I said, so without further... Yeah.
Hello, so I'm Mio Arif. I'm a student from UM and also the president of the Economic Society. So actually, I have a few questions, if I may ask them. So I think the first one was regarding Trump specifically. So I think everyone here has thoughts behind why Trump does certain actions and things like that. Perhaps our thoughts are more developed than his own before he did whatever he did. But I think that we can sort of agree that it's a lot of posturing on his side. As you mentioned, it's probably trying to strong arm and show that there's a zero-sum game. So I think my question regarding this was then, considering the context of what's happening, do you think that the US is able to outlast this essentially long game of chicken and show people that you need the US? Or do you think that countries are simply going to move away and move on from the US and understand that they don't really need this anymore, and that maybe this might be the final nail in the coffin of US as a great power? I think that's my first question. Just, is US going to win this game of this big gamble, or are countries simply going to move on and move away, maybe either on their own or move to China? My second question would be regarding ASEAN. I think Professor Wu Wing Tai mentioned a lot about how ASEAN itself is probably not in the position to be much of a bargaining power and state alternatives, as if bringing in Korea, Japan, also moving like other middle powers such as Europe then. I think my question on this would be twofold. One is about, should ASEAN model itself after the EU in terms of integration? Because clearly I think that's probably the fairest parallel to draw in terms of how ASEAN can look like moving forward, in order for it to have some form of like relevance and unity to be able to be a bargaining power? Or is it should be like something that, as suggested, and that they should get other members in, maybe look more towards BRICS, look more towards things like the OIC, maybe bring in Korea and China, Korea and Japan? Or do you think that this would be disbeneficial, because the more heads you bring in, the less likely you're able to have a unified bloc to challenge either the US or China?
Okay. Just those two questions, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks. The next person.
My name is Munira. I appreciate all the deliberations about how mad or not mad Trump is. But honestly, wouldn't the panel agree that the US has always been operating on a zero-sum platform forever, at least since World War II? With that in mind, can the panel please comment about the timing between what happened on October 7th, 2023, and then Trump's behavior and initiatives right now, as well as over the last 15 years, we have had a realignment of world order, basically. So this realignment has been ongoing. Trump's response is not a surprise, really. It's just taken a different format. What I would like the comment from all of you is, where do you see the role of minilateralisms in this context? And is the era of hegemony, US hegemony, or even China hegemony, is that era actually over? Should it be over? And where are minilateralism's role, for instance, like BRICS? Where do you see that role in the future? Let's say 5 to 10 years from now. I mean, I think the world is fed up with hegemony. Okay. What hegemony we're talking about, I think that's another discussion. But what about a conversation about the existence of many minilateralisms? Thank you.
Thank you. One last question.
Hello, my name is Elida. I think EU CBAM, I think my question is to Prof. Evelyn. EU CBAM is ongoing, for 7 sectors, cement, steel, fertilizers, and all that. But currently, right now the latest one that's hitting us and a lot of the SMEs in Malaysia is actually the EU Deforestation Regulation, EUDR. So the EUDR actually states that the SMEs and also any Malaysian company, even the big boys that are exporting to EU, for example, are facing, traceability issues. They are asking for geolocation up to latitude, longitude, up to 6 decimal points. So, like for example, how should SMEs, irregardless of country negotiations and trade agreements and all that, how would SMEs need to react to this? As there is a lot of export, especially in our major commodities and plantation in Malaysia, right? So, for example, palm oil, cocoa, soy, coffee, timber, and rubber. So, I think it's kind of like something that's going to kick in. They have extended it to next year, but I think 2027, a lot of people are going to be hit by it. Not only that we are exporting to to EU, but we're also exporting to other countries that might export to EU, and then they're going to trace it back to country of origin, right? So regardless of US-China tariff wars and all that, I think EU is subtly doing this tariff through regulations. And so how would Malaysian companies need to react to this? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Out of questions there, all targeted at the panel as a whole. Would any one of you want to start? I think Professor Wu was mentioned. Sorry?
I think the question on I think you have to separate between the multilateralism as defined by institutions being set up by US post Second World War, right? So that's the multilateral, the World Bank, the WTO, the GATT, the IMF, those are institutions, United Nations, WHO, and all those things. For those of us who are born, say, after the war, that's what multilateral global institutions are, right? So the next question is actually, the corollary to that is actually, what is the currency that actually underlies those institutions? It's the US dollar, right? But Jomo raised the issue whether payment settlements punya mechanism beyond settlement in dollars, that didn't happen. So basically you have the dollar regime underlying the various global institutions, right? Now, what happens here is actually whether or not the institution will remain after this is an open question. But the US is taking a position they are going to undermine the very institution that they created, right? That's what they're doing. So I think China is positioning itself as, I will be the protector, defender of multilateralism. Because China is saying, oh, you don't go against WTO rules. And so China is doing the complementary set. If the US is, like Wu cakap, US is saying, I'm erecting barriers around me, so you have the complementary set. But at the rate that we're going, we will see an undermining of multilateral institutions now. But that is one half of the question. And the other half of the question is, what about the currency underlying this? The currency underlying this is actually the dollar. 80% of settlements of trade is done in dollar. US dollar still is about 50% of reserves in most central banks. So that's the other bit. That's why in my presentation I was trying to separate between the trade side of things and the monetary side of things, which is actually currency lah. So I think the trade side, multilateral institutions will be undermined because the people who design it is undermining it itself. Now the open question is actually what will happen over time with the dollar, and therefore dollar assets, dollar the currency, dollar the debt, dollar the dollar assets, and so on. So that's still an open question, I think. But the multilateral institution, I think, is being undermined because nobody will believe the US anymore, right? After this, I mean, he might reverse and all these things, but nobody will believe. There was a weaponization of the dollar against Russia at the start of the Ukrainian war, and then there's this doing it again to Iran, doing it again to, now he's doing it again to the whole world lah. So, but it will take time lah. US is a huge economy, right? It's a freaking continent. It's not like UK. UK after the Second World War is a small island. After a while, dia buat kacau satu dunia and then it will just go off. But even then, the sterling was around until what? 1970s, 1980s. So the US is a huge continent with its own resources, 350 million people. So you'll be around quite a bit. But I think multilateralism, global institution, I don't think so.
Thank you. I might want to take off from what Dr. Nong just mentioned. I think we have a variety of multilateralisms, and I don't think we can call the BRICS organization a multilateral institution. It is, by its very nature, plurilateral. But I think what we have had is, as he pointed out, right after World War II, partly because Europe was devastated by the war. Japan was devastated by the war. So they didn't have much. And the US presumed that they would continue to have the surplus, for eternity. And that was the folly of the US. Because of that presumption, they agreed, they wanted a system, they opposed the English proposals, and we ended up with the settlements arrangements, which is completely unsatisfactory, and now they are suffering from it, and as a consequence of that, they want to change the rules. So let's be very clear that, Trump and his predecessors will all be quite comfortable with multilateral rules which serve their interests. But once they no longer serve their interests, then they are uncommitted to them and they will undermine them. But they will do so still very often by using the rhetoric. Okay, Trump is not going to withdraw from the UN, at least for the time being, for a variety of reasons, because the UN system still serves the interests by and large. If you look, for example, at the WTO, he invokes the language of the WTO. He calls these tariffs reciprocal tariffs. What does it reciprocate? Okay, I don't think even Stephen Miran knows, or what's his name? Peter Navarro knows. They don't reciprocate anything. Okay, but it is suitable rhetoric. But I think one should, one area where I think it is wrong to dismiss this kind of thinking as completely devoid of understanding. If you look at Miran's paper, he actually makes a very selective, distorted argument, but which academic paper is not distorted? Okay, you make all kinds of abstractions, and so to dismiss Miran and the other Trump apologists as wrong-headed. I don't like them, but it doesn't make them any less coherent on their own terms. Okay, Kennedy. I mean, what's his name? Peter Navarro. Navarro is a different kettle of fish. I mean, he never had a coherent argument to begin with. Okay, he's just simply driven by animus. Okay, and but I think it's very important for us to recognize that there are a variety of options. Now, Professor Wu has a very, an argument about what might be a complicated. My argument is very, very modest. Okay, because maybe I'm getting quite old, but I was slightly involved with an earlier government, and the only proposal of mine which was accepted was the proposal to allocate money for COVID-19. Okay, that was the only thing I ever succeeded in doing. Okay, so I'm very realistic and very pessimistic about what can be achieved. But that's precisely why I think we have to begin with what we have. And we have ZOP-FUN. And whatever you might think about the limitations of ZOP-FUN, we haven't exhausted the potential of ZOP-FUN. We have the non-aligned movement. Whatever you might say about non-aligned movement, and I've said many things which perhaps I sometimes regret, but nonetheless, it offers the best potential. Can you imagine a world where the first deputy managing director of the IMF, Gita Gopinath, makes an argument why developing countries should be non-aligned? Okay? It was inconceivable before she actually made that argument. And now she has made that argument. We have a strange confluence of possible allies where you have the IMF. God forbid, the IMF supporting a view which I would be comfortable with. And you have all kinds of other people who have been pillars of the establishment and so on, but who are now making arguments which are realistic. And the world has changed. And the person we need to thank for it is Mr. Trump. Let's face it. So rather than lament that Trump is destroying that wonderful world which never existed, and what you are implying, Dr. Alatas, is that we have a situation in the world where the post-war world, the last 80 years, has been characterized by imperialism. But we must also recognize that imperialism has changed. And we need to recognize the potential which Mr. Trump presents before us, the potential to reorder the system. Now, there are many issues where we may not agree with the Europeans, but the Europeans are, as Professor Wu correctly pointed out, as upset and as threatened by what Mr. Trump has done. So we need to recognize the potential. But I wouldn't trust the Europeans either. CBAM is as protectionist as you can get. And a whole range of things. Remember during the pandemic, we were trying to get exemptions for therapies and so on. Professor Chan was fighting away for these kinds of issues to get exemptions for therapies, for tests, and so on and so forth, so that the patents would not be applied. This was a principle which Mandela fought for in what I call the Mandela's last battle against the application of intellectual property rights in times of public health emergencies. And what did the Europeans do? Instead of enabling it, they blocked it. Okay? It was not Biden who blocked it. It was the Europeans who blocked it. So I think we have to recognize that we are now getting into a situation where you will have to make allies with people you might want to close your nose about before getting close to them. But you need to work with whatever is possible in order to try to not only protect ourselves, but also try to build the elements of a new world. And this, I think, is what we need to do. So I would say that, yes, We lament what is happening, but we should begin with what we have and try to build on it and to move forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you. The first question by the first person was, would America win the war? It is a subset of the first section of the second person's question, which was, if, let us say, America win the war, then we have unilateralism of the US. And if China wins the war, would we have unilateralism by China? Or would there be no more unilateralism in the future? What is clear is the following. China now has the same productive capacity as the United States. The right way to measure it is the PPP exchange rate. In other words, China can make as many aircraft carriers each year as the Americans are capable of making. But the GDP per capita per person in China is between a quarter and a third of the United States. And the Chinese population is more than 3 times that of the US. What explains the difference between GDP per capita is the level of technology. Given existing technology, the Chinese are able to fully utilize it, they would be 3 times bigger than the US. The question is, could this diffusion of technology be stopped? The answer is unlikely. So basically in the future, China is going to be 3 times the size of the US. So does that mean that we will face a new unilateralism? The answer is no. The answer is no. Can come in 2 forms. One form is both of these countries finally recognize and accept Kissinger's solution for the rise for China. Kissinger has foreseen the rise of China. It's going to be much bigger than the US sometime in the far future. And so what has he proposed? Basically, why should you and I fight over what we each have? The world is so big, we should combine together and bully the rest of the world together. That is the G2 proposal of Kissinger. Why should we engage in a Cold War between you and me? We just partner up and make all these other people heal. Now, even that Kissinger proposal will not happen, even if the 2 countries want to do it. The simple reason is the age of unilateralism is over. There can be no more global hegemon like the United Kingdom in the 19th century and the United States in the 20th century. The reason is it is not the dragon that will replace the eagle in the sky. That is the Indian elephant that will become as big as China and whose trunk could reach up to the sky to challenge the dragon and the eagle. And if Europe were to integrate, the European bull will be as big as the United States and China. Basically, it is a world of multilateralism. A multipolar world has emerged, will emerge. And given that a multipolar world has emerged, what it really means is we need a global governance design that's suitable for multiple superpowers. And one such design is different spheres of influence. And when you talk about China, we this with China, we balance that with the US. Think of what happens when Mike Froman, the USTR, came to ask Tokpa to join TPP. TPP was supposed to be as neoclassical theory as you can be, complete free trade, and no government ownership of industries and so forth. But what did he tell Tokpa? Don't worry lah, I exempt you from all of this for 20 years if you join TPP, because that is under American leadership. So if you join my sphere of influence, you don't have to worry of cloud certification, GLC ownership, Bumiputra policy. That is what will be offered. So the question is, can we not think of an alternative to spheres of influence? And I think the key is the global governance mechanism, which the club I talk about of middle powers, of European, a North-South coalition, not just a global South identity, is the solution. Now it comes to the question of ASEAN. Yes, we are a diverse group. Could we even get together? The truth is, the first condition of ASEAN being able to move forward is that there must be consistent with what Indonesia wants ASEAN to be. And this is what Indonesia wants to see. And if you have Indonesia on board, then you need 4 more big countries to agree. Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand. Bring any 4 of them plus Indonesia, the rest of ASEAN will flow along, because we got critical mass of moving. Achieving critical mass quickly is important, because otherwise they're not going to take you seriously when you try to say you got to negotiate with us collectively. Why should one ever negotiate collectively with the other side? Divide and rule. That's what the proxy wars are. So we have to be able to do it ourselves. And like Jomo say, we might have to hold our nose and forget historical injustices by the Europeans in this part of the world. But there's common interests that bind us. We are not out for revenge. We are just out for a better future. That is what the key is. So on the question of who will win it, who will win this war, and would we ever go back to the good old days? The good old days will never come back, because this will be a multipolar world. And we need a global governance mechanism that's consistent then. Now, there is a very interesting question of dollar dominance. When something gets too big, it's beyond the government's ability to regulate. What would that be? In fact, we have now the beginning of a good substitute for the dollar. That is what Donald Trump started the trend, strengthening the trend going 2 days before he took the oath of office. What was that? He founded a cryptocurrency. Basically, if the cryptocurrency continues to grow, it'll become too big and too indispensable for the central banks of the world to kill it. We will have a gangster currency, which is as the international settlements mechanism. That is what really cryptocurrency is. Who is it most important to? It is most important to people who want to protect their identity. And when it has become universal in use, no central banks can kill it, because money is a medium of exchange that is accepted. And the fact that many gangsters are using it, well, that's the way it will be. Now, I would like to say a few words on the SMEs. We should help them in trade, help them in that. What do the surveys show when you ask SME owners? What is your biggest problem? The biggest problem in all SME surveys, they say, is cash flow. When I sell my products, I give at least 30 days credit to my buyer. He pays you back after 30 days. And sometimes I give 90 days credit. If 2 or 3 of my customers cannot pay me in time, I have to reduce production because I cannot pay my workers and buy material. That's what cash flow problem is. My customer can pay but not pay right now. He's delayed. This is highly abnormal. This never used to happen before 1997. Why? The reason is that in 1998, to deal with the recapitalization of all the banks, we created 10 big commercial banks. From the 95 finance domestic commercial banks, we shrunk it to less than 40. So basically, we have got only big banks. And what do big banks find out? They like to lend money to big firms because big firms borrow a huge amount. Whether you borrow $1 billion or $1 million, the paperwork is the same. So big banks like to lend to the big boys. Small banks, of course, would like to lend to the big boys too. But the big boys don't want to deal with small banks because they cannot do the international transactions. So what do the small banks do? They lend money to SMEs. That's what traditionally has been. And so when we kill them all in the Asian financial crisis to create the 10 monopoly banks by Tundime, basically we ensure that the SMEs will forever be short of working capital. And what has that cost? We see it in the lampposts everywhere. There's such a shortage of credit, all the loans came out to take the risk of supplying credit. In Malaysia, we fought the Asian financial crisis with 2 big spectacular moves. One is the stopping of capital flows. We freeze the dollar, the ringgit at 3.8. The other one was we consolidate all the banks. We have removed the capital controls, but we have not resumed issuing licenses to small and medium banks. In fact, of the 10 big banks that were created, they have consolidated further. 8. What do these banks do? These banks are highly conservative monopoly, which is why our banks close at 4 p.m. You won't see this in the United Kingdom. You don't see this in the USA. It is because these are state-owned bank monopoly. When I talk about this shortage of capital by SMEs, which is exceedingly important now, because as the world turns away from, as the US turns away from importing from China, they import from places like Malaysia. So FDI is rushing in here to service that. But should we not want our SMEs to grow to service this new demand for exports? They cannot grow because they cannot get the capital. And given the decarbonization demands that we are making, these SMEs will all have to close. They cannot get the capital to buy new equipment and so forth. Basically, we've got to stop slapping ourselves with not issuing banking licenses. I've spoken to the bank CEOs of some biggest banks in Malaysia. They tell me, there's no such thing as capital, working capital shortage. Everybody can get it. Well, that means that all the SME corporation surveys were all wrong. And Malaysians just lie. That would be the only thing. Well, I've taken enough time, but I think that in terms of the themes of today's conference, I think we should know that a new global governance architecture is necessary. And there is a need for it that we should unite the middle powers to be able to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for those two questions. I'll just handle the one on minilateralism and the EUC BAM. I think the role of minilateralism is today global trade is very fragmented. So minilateralism will coexist with multilateralism and even bilateralism if you define minilateralism as small groups, simply because they are practical. I mean, in minilateral groups, you can think of public-private partnerships to address certain capacity building initiatives and so on. So the modality of cooperation may be very different in minilateral groups compared to multilateral groups. And the WTO, I think, acknowledges that. That is why the WTO keeps defending its position by saying things like climate change is a public good. We are still relevant and so on, because people are starting to question WTO and its role in multilateralism. I think, but the reality is all three will coexist and they play a different role. Minilaterals are very important to move project-based initiatives faster within like-minded countries. In terms of the, one good example, whether you call it is a small group, the Digital Economy, DEPA, Digital Economy Partnership Agreement, I think, yeah, between Singapore, Chile, and New Zealand. I mean, Singapore would realize it cannot wait for DEFA under ASEAN, because digital trade rules are very, very complex. How do you streamline? It's a different ballgame altogether when you talk about digital trade compared to physical trade. The rules are very much more complex in terms of trade flows, transfer of data, localization, storage, and so on. So I guess minilaterals in that sense have a role to play. In terms of EU-CBAM, we did a study. I mean, exporting to the UK, I think as Prof. Jomo said, it's one form of green protectionism, the CBAM itself. But companies realize, the EU says you can export if you're unable to show, that you have met the carbon footprint requirements, you have a carbon tax, right? But what's happening in our country is that a lot of the big firms are engaged in greenwashing. It's just a CSR checkbox. They have not been quite serious. It is costly. It is costly to actually implement and use digital tracking to see scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 1 is carbon emissions within your own firm's operations. Then you have to look at scope 2, which is all your suppliers. I mean, this is something that cannot be done easily. You have to invest in digital tracking, AI, and so on. So when you look at it, where will the SMEs who probably are even using Excel spreadsheets, how are they going to calculate this carbon emissions among their suppliers and even within their own firms? So I think the government, the bigger firms are starting to invest in AI and data to sort of like face some of these challenges if they want to continue to export. Other firms, I think, will find some way around to actually diversify. We see palm oil now going to China, India, Pakistan. So, they find other ways of going about things. But ultimately, if you want to export to the EU, I don't think the European Union will back down in terms of the CBAM. They still will go ahead. So it's either you comply to get into that market or you pay a carbon tax. But I guess in the context of Malaysia assisting these firms, I think the larger firms have to think that efficiency in this case, or their investment returns, which will be a bit more long-term than short-term or medium-term, and they need to invest in AI and data, and they need to track their suppliers. So monitoring and traceability will become key in their supply chains. I'm not sure that answered, but that's my short answer.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Izin. We've run way out of time, so I'd like to thank our distinguished speakers, and you all for staying on. So I think refreshments are available outside. So that's it, yeah. So thank you again for coming over and for your questions. Sorry? Oh, yeah, okay. I'll pass it on to the MC.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you to all our panelists for your critical insight and to all of you for participating in today's dialogue. May I invite Prof. Zaharum and all the panelists to the seat for a group photo, for a quick group photo. Thank you. To all the audience, if you don't mind moving your seats, because